Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the ancient evolutionary psychology that is quietly but powerfully dictating modern romance and, well, infidelity. You know all those messy relationship dramas we experience today? They didn't just pop out of nowhere. They're actually deeply rooted in survival strategies that were literally forged over millions of years. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the signs of infidelity, the roots of attraction, what men and women want, the evolutionary cheating divide, and finally, the mate-switching hypothesis. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Signs of Infidelity. Modern Red Flags.
So, we're kicking off our detective story in the present day, looking at those incredibly high-stakes behaviors that just instantly trigger relationship anxiety. Oxford scientist Mackin Murphy, who studies evolutionary anthropology, points out these very specific, highly modern behavioral tells that signal an unfaithful partner. We're talking about things like guarding a smartphone like it's an absolute state secret, or turning the screen face down on the table, or, adamantly refusing to plug it into Apple CarPlay just in case a rogue text pops up on the dashboard. Add in a sudden, unexplained burst of vanity, like a massive new interest in hitting the gym, or quickly changing the subject whenever a certain friend gets brought up. And well, you've got your classic modern red flags.
But why did these specific behaviors even happen? I mean, to really understand them, we have to shift our focus way back in time. Because believe it or not, a phone screen turned face down. It's really just the latest technological manifestation of a very, very old biological script.
All right, part 2, the roots of attraction and human mate selection.
Listen, if we want to figure out why people cheat, we absolutely have to understand why they choose their partners in the very first place. So, enter our evolutionary Rosetta Stone. This is Dr. David Buss's groundbreaking 1989 paper that investigated the evolutionary hypotheses behind who we actually choose to love. Before this landmark study, we honestly didn't have much definitive cross-cultural data about exactly which characteristics people truly valued in potential mates.
Now, what makes this study so unprecedented is the sheer, staggering scale of the data. Dr. Buss surveyed over 10,000 individuals, and this was across 37 diverse cultures, spanning 6 continents and 5 islands. We are talking about pulling data from Nigeria to Japan, from West Germany to Brazil. This massive global scale gives immense credibility to the findings. It proves we're looking at a fundamental human species trait here, not just some localized cultural quirk.
Moving on to part 3, what men and women want. Let's look at the evolutionary differences.
So, what did those 10,000 people actually reveal to us? Well, this comparison highlights some very distinct evolutionary selection pressures. Think about it. Ancestral females faced a massive biological burden when it came to gestating and raising children, right? So naturally, they prioritized resources to ensure their offspring survived. Because of that, they evolved to look for cues like ambition, earning capacity, and industriousness. Males, on the flip side, whose initial biological investment could technically be pretty minimal, prioritized cues to reproductive capacity. Basically, they were looking for youth and physical attractiveness to ensure their genes successfully passed on to the next generation.
And the empirical data backs this up perfectly. Just take a look at the data we have here. This shows how females across vastly different continents consistently placed a much higher value on a mate's earning potential than males did. It's actually kind of wild. Out of 37 samples, 36 showed a statistically significant difference where females valued a good financial prospect more highly.
Conversely, the data also demonstrates a widespread cross-cultural male preference for physical attractiveness. Literally across the globe, males consistently rated good looks higher than females did. And again, when we put this in the context of evolutionary psychology, physical appearance and youth aren't just superficial preferences. They are ancient, hardwired biological cues for fertility.
We can clearly see this divergence play out in age preferences too. The data showed that females universally prefer mates about 3.5 years older than themselves, which makes sense, as it aligns with the fact that older males generally have had more time to accumulate resources. Males, however, prefer mates roughly 2.5 years younger, which, you guessed it, aligns closely with peak female reproductive fertility.
The raw data we're seeing confirms something crucial. These aren't just arbitrary societal constructs from one specific region. No, these are deeply ingrained biological blueprints that completely transcend geography. Whether we're looking at Zambia, Colombia, or Poland, the directional preference remains astonishingly constant. Which brings us to part 4, the evolutionary cheating divide. Let's get into the mechanics of infidelity.
Now, if men and women look for completely different things when forming relationships, it totally stands to reason that their motivations to cheat might also diverge, right? Returning to Oxford scientist Mack and Murphy's research, we see a really stark contrast. When men commit infidelity, they often do so simply out of a desire for romantic and sexual variety. They basically just want more partners for the sake of having more partners, a drive linked to ancestral evolutionary benefits. Women, however, exhibit a very different pattern. While sexual motivation definitely plays a role, female infidelity is often highly emotionally motivated. Women are much more likely to become emotionally disengaged from their primary partner and actually fall in love with their affair partner.
Now, I want to pause here. It is absolutely crucial to clarify that we have to view these as impartial, on-average statistical differences. These are definitely not absolute rules for every single individual. As Murphy himself rightly points out, human behavior is incredibly complex. We are analyzing the broad, overarching evolutionary currents here, okay? We're not trying to put every single person into a rigid, inescapable box. Plenty of men do cheat for emotional reasons, and plenty of women absolutely cheat for sexual variety.
All right, part 5, the mate-switching hypothesis. Let's look at exactly why women stray. This brings us to the real climax of this explainer, trying to decode the grand hypotheses of why women cheat. For a long time, evolutionary psychology leaned pretty heavily on what's called the dual mating strategy hypothesis. This theory suggested a somewhat clinical approach. The idea was that a woman might secure resources and stability from one reliable long-term male while secretly seeking out good genes from a different, perhaps more physically attractive affair partner, all to maximize the genetic quality of her offspring.
But here's the fascinating twist that kind of throws a wrench into that old theory. In recent discussions between Dr. David Buss and neurobiologist Andrew Huberman, Buss highlights a really critical piece of data. He notes that roughly 70%, 70% of women who have affairs report actually falling in love with their affair partner.
And this heavy emotional involvement completely contradicts the idea of a purely clinical genetic dual mating strategy. Think about it. If a woman was just trying to quietly grab some good genes on the side while keeping her stable partner in the dark, falling deeply in love with the affair partner is a terrible strategy. It risks completely destroying the primary relationship and losing all of those vital resources she supposedly wanted to keep.
So, because of this overwhelming emotional data, Dr. David Buss actually advocates for a totally different explanation. It's called the mate-switching hypothesis. He argues that, for women, affairs are often a calculated, though perhaps subconscious, evolutionary exit strategy. It's essentially a mechanism to end an unsatisfying relationship and trade up to a higher value mate. This framework completely reframes how we look at infidelity. It's not just some mere pursuit of good genes on the sly. It's a highly complex biological mechanism for transitioning your life. Falling in love with the affair partner isn't an accident at all. It's actually the necessary emotional fuel required to break the existing bond and move into a potentially better, more supportive environment.
As we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you to consider this. Our modern relationships are essentially being played out on top of deeply buried, ancient biological wiring. So the next time you see someone anxiously flip their smartphone face down on a dinner table, you really have to ask yourself, are you just witnessing a modern secret being hidden? Or are you actually watching a million-year-old evolutionary survival strategy, quietly pulling the strings from the shadows? Thank you so much for exploring the data with me today.